I am going to walk through making a fairly simple part and talking through some main hotkeys and other basic functionalities within SOLIDWORKS. So as we know, we can start with a couple options when we want to make something new or open something. If we do Control-N or we click this little new page icon on the top, we have three options. We can start a part, start an assembly, which is a collection of parts, or we can make a drawing from a part or an assembly. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to focus on a part right now. So I'm going to select part, click OK, or click Enter on the keyboard. And to show you what I want this part to look like, this is the end product we're going for. So it's a simple little L bracket that has a fillet on the corners and a hole that goes through the middle. This is my design tree on the left. You'll see it's made up of a boss extrude, a cut, and a fillet. So if we minimize this and we start from scratch, I will walk you through how to make this. So like we know, we need to start in one of the three basic planes, the front, the top, or the right plane. For the purposes of this part, I want to start in the right plane just because of the kind of the orientation I had in that visual. So if I'm going to click the plane, I can then go up here and click Sketch, or you'll see when I actually click this plane, this little box shows up here. I can also click Sketch here. I'm going to click that, left click it, and now I'm in my sketch. Then I can start drawing. So I'm just going to start by drawing a couple lines. And as you might soon find out with SOLIDWORKS, it will kind of give you these smart guides. So this little dotted line, I'm going to stay on this dotted line and just left click and make the rough outline of my L bracket. Just very basic. And as I'm doing this, I'm using the guidelines that SOLIDWORKS gives me. And so you'll see here, all of my lines have these little green boxes. This says vertical, this says horizontal, and you'll also notice that whenever I hover over it, it highlights the line that it's referring to in pink. These are geometric constraints. So basically, no matter how much I move this point, this line will always stay horizontal. This line will always stay horizontal. Similarly, if I move this point, these lines will stay horizontal and vertical because they have those geometric constraints. So that's good. Now I'm going to add some dimensions. I can click Smart Dimension up here, left click, and just start to add some dimensions in here. I'm clicking the line, and I'm going to type in, right now I'm working in IPS, so I'm going to just do 3. I can also type in 3 IN, which would mean 3 inches. And SOLIDWORKS is smart enough to know what those dimensional callouts are. Similarly, I'm going to type in a dimension here. Let's say I want to make this 3 inches also. And then a thickness for this little piece here. Let's say I want it 0.25 inches. Or I can also type in, if I know the millimeter, if I like to work in millimeters as opposed to English units, then I can just type in 6.35 millimeters, which is the same as 0.25 inches. Click Enter, and it does the math for me. So there's 0.25. And let's say if I know that I want this thickness to be consistent throughout, I can either add a dimension here, or I can also just select this line. Oops, that was a point. I'm going to select this line, hold down Shift, select this line, and now it gives me some options here for relations. The bold here, it already knows they're going to be perpendicular to each other, which makes sense because this is always vertical and that's always horizontal. So if I just say equal, that should do the trick as well. So now, if I double click this and I update this number, let's say I want it 1/2 inch, I realize later on that I actually want to make this thicker, it will update my sketch. So that's really great. So make sure when you're typing in these numbers and these relations, you keep track of your design intent. That's really important. So now the model is fully defined, and I know that because all of the lines here are black. Everything's black. If I click a point and I try to move it around, it won't be able to move, which is what I want. Okay, so it's fully defined. I also know this because if I exit my sketch, or if I click Control B, as in rebuild, then my sketch right now over here, there's no minus sign, we're doing okay. At this point, I am going to extrude my sketch. So I have an object here, a sketch. It says pick a sketch or draw one. I already have one, so I'm going to click this. And I am going to specify some length. Let's use my little scroll wheel here. Let's say I want to make it 2 inches, and I want to extrude it mid-plane. So I want the sketch I made to be in the middle of the extrusion. You can fool around with these two. You can make it blind, change the direction. Again, this all comes down to your design intent. For the purposes of this, though, I'm just going to make this mid-plane. Click OK. And now, my design tree here on the left, you'll see my sketch is now embedded inside of the feature I just created. Now, I want to create, if we go back to our original part that we're shooting for here, and Control 7 is also a really nice hotkey that makes the view isometric automatically. As you see, it just kind of adjusted it there. So I'm still missing a couple features. I still need to make a cut, and I need to make a couple fillets. So let's make the cut the cut hole here. I'm going to rotate my frame here, hold down the scroll wheel, and just move around the mouse. And I'm going to use this surface now. I'm going to draw a circle. If I hit Control 8, then I am perpendicular to my sketch surface, which is pretty handy. Now I'm going to draw a circle, click, left click both ways. And I still need to add some dimensions here, because now if I click this and move it around, it's not defined in space, and it's also not defined in terms of diameter. So let's say I want to make this hole 1 inch. Again, I'm working in IPS, so I can just click 1. Let's say I want to make this in the center. I use the midplane. I can center this in a number of ways. I can click the center, hold down Control, click the origin, which I know is always in the center of my part because I did a midplane extrusion. And if I click vertical, these will always be constrained. So no matter where I move this thing, it'll always be in the middle of my part now. Another good reason to make your boss extrude midplane. Let's say I want to center it in this direction too. I want this to be centered all around. And now I can just cut it. Again, if I rotate around, I can see what this cut's going to look like. There's a couple options here with the cutting tool. I can say through all, up to next, which in this case would just be through the surface. So let's just say I want to go up to next. Both will give you the same thing in this case because it's a very simple part. But again, that might change as you get more complex with your parts. So like before, we have this sketch, which is now, this cut rather, which is now reliant on the sketch. So let's say for some reason I come back to this a week later and I want to actually change some dimensions, but I want this thing to still stay centered. If I go in here, if I click the sketch and I double click this dimension, I'm going to make this 4 inches now and click Control B to rebuild it, you'll see this hole is no longer in the middle. So in order to fix this, what I can do is, if I know I always want it to be in the center here, I can go into this drawing, figure out how this dimension is being referenced. So what I'm interested in here is this information up here. So D2 at sketch 1. This means this is the second dimension, D2, that I made in sketch 1. So if I keep track of that, so let's actually go in here. I'm going to copy this, Control C, copy this text, and if I go back into this sketch now, Control 8, I can set a reference here. So I can now say that instead of this thing being 1.5 inches from the edge, what I really want it to be is halfway in between my part. So I can say, I want to make sure this is equal to D2 at sketch 1 divided by 2. So I want it to be half the length of this edge. Click Enter, Enter again. And now you'll see the dimension looks a little bit different. We have this sigma here. This basically means that it's an equation. So if I X out of this now, you can look at this also in your little equations tab here, and I have a new equation here. So the second dimension, D2 at sketch 2, which is basically the call out here, how far away this circle is from the edge, is equal to D2 at sketch 1 divided by 2. So now, anytime I make an adjustment, this hole will always stay centered. Again, I need to do Control B, and there you go. The hole is always centered, which is really great. So definitely use equations when you can, if you know you're going to be making a lot of changes with your parts over time, because they will save you a lot of hassle in the long run. So Control 7, we're back to our isometric. And the last thing we want to do here is add some fillets. So I'm going to go to Fillet and basically add some rounded corners. Just click the edge. And right now I get a full preview of it. I can change the actual fillet amount. Say I want to do, instead of 0.1 inch radius, I want to do 0.2 inch radius, and so forth, and it'll update for you automatically. But for now, we'll keep it at 0.1. And there you go. So now our parts should start to look the same. So there you go. So our parts now look the same. And we are all set. Lastly, if you want to change the perspective view, again, you can do this in some of these tabs up here. You can move to a kind of simplified view there with no edges. I can change to this line format. Play around with these settings, kind of get comfortable with it and start to realize what you like to look at. And then lastly, let's say you wanted to get rid of this little tangent edge. You can do that by going into View, Display, and then Tangent Edges Removed. And you can get rid of those little lines there, and now any radius will now look smooth. Lastly, if you have a more complex part, you can use a cross-sectional view if you want to kind of look inside of something, if you have some hollows or something in particular you want to check out. You can use this tool here and take a look inside of parts. And there's your first part.